Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We had been scheduled to start in about 10 minutes, so I think everybody's here, so we'll go ahead and start a little early. And welcome to this special event. First, I want to acknowledge a few key people, starting with Willa Derrick, who is the only daughter of Juanita Brooks, and she's sitting here with us today. Please raise your hand. That's her right there. For anybody who doesn't know, that's her right there. Also, we have Stephen Snow, who served as LDS Church historian and several other leadership duties in the church over the past 20 years or so. And he was a young person here in Dixie and read Juanita's book and was impacted by that. So, welcome. Also, we have received $18,000 over 2 years from Washington County through a RAP tax grant, which stands for Recreation, Arts, and Parks. And we have County Commissioner Gil Almquist here this evening. We have support on this project from the City of St. George and have been in discussions with them along with State Representatives Walt Brooks and Brad Last, who are legislators for our area. And thank you to our many volunteers, partners, and supporters who could not be here tonight, and especially to each of you. My name is Jesse Stocking. I work closely with the Washington County Historical Society. I am the Juanita Brooks Statue Project Committee Chairperson. And I might do us all well to come up with a shorter name for that. So thank you again, everybody, for coming. It's been a great time working on putting this event together and meeting all kinds of people that are in this room over the phone first and then here in person tonight. And we're glad to have you all here. So now I will introduce the selected speakers, and these are 7 people who made a commitment to come and share stories and have a conversation and be on the list of speakers. And so we have Willa Brooks, daughter of Juanita Brooks. We have Dallin Moody, great-grandson, and I'm not sure if he's arrived yet, but he's on his way, according to his mother. We wanted to try to represent a different span of age group, and he's 21 years old, and he did a history fair project about Juanita Brooks in high school, I believe. So, is that the one right outside the door? Yes. Yeah, that's the board right out there. We also have Ken Reber.
Right there.
There he is. That's right. He's a nephew of Juanita Brooks. We have John D. Green, who was a student of Juanita in 9th grade English. We have Paul Brooks, a grandson. And a student. In school or just everywhere else in that home? Yeah. And we have Dawn Humphreys, who is a granddaughter. So I would also like to invite anyone in the crowd who has experience with a particular question that comes up during the discussion to share a quick memory in addition, if you would like. So I'll go ahead and have Ken Reber start us off. And the microphone is just for the camera to be able to get the sound. And so,
Can you hear it all right? Am I coming through? All right.
Ken, why don't you sit down? I don't want to stand up.
Oh, all right. Can handle that. Well, it's an honor to be able to share a couple of things. Hopefully it won't be repetitious. I graduated from Dixie College in 1961. And I went home to my parents and they said, we don't want you. So they said, go to BYU. So I went to BYU. And in those days, you could show up and enroll and take you right in. And I did. I enrolled this day and went the next day. And I needed a place to live. And Carl was up there. Carl Brooks was up there taking his summer schooling. He was a school teacher down in Mesquite. And so I needed a roommate, and he had room. And so I moved in with him for the summer. And we traveled together up to see, well, let me back up just a second. My first year at Dixie, I lived with the Brookses. Carrick Levitt and I were nephews, and we lived together. And then at the end of that year, she took the position of the Utah Historical Society position, whatever the role was. And so they moved from there up to Salt Lake, which meant that I had to go find another place to live the next year, but I did survive. That summer I went up, as I started to say, to and found Carl. Needed a place to live, and I joined in with him for the summer. We did a lot of things together. And on one occasion, Juanita called, Aunt Nita, called and said, you need to come to church. We're speaking in sacrament meeting. So the whole family's coming, with the exception of Willa, I think, who was in Europe. So we all, and I was invited to come. I tagged along, obviously, and even sang a solo in the sacrament meeting. And so it was a great event. I mean, I'd never thought much about it. Years later, when I read the history or the book, and I've forgotten who the author is.
Levi Peterson.
Yeah, Levi Peterson. Levi Peterson had written the whole thing up, and that occasion, for the first time, I learned that was the first time that Will and Juanita Brooks, had spoken in sacrament meeting for many, many years. I don't know, 20, 30, whatever the time went back. I didn't find out about that until later, that was the historic occasion. And I didn't learn about it until a year or two later, but I sure felt favored to be able to be there and to be a part of that for that significant occasion. On another occasion, she had moved to work at the Utah Historical Society, and I came home from BYU that summer and decided to go on a mission, got a mission call, headed for Germany. And we went up and we went through the old missionary, whatever they called it in those days, mission home, and packed full with the elders and sisters, and they came to about Wednesday or Thursday and announced that we were all going to be set apart by the apostles. And so of course, they said, if you've got your parents can come if they're here, or if you have someone else. And so I walked up the street on a lunch break to the Utah Historical Society location, walked in and talked to Aunt Nita and invited her and Uncle Will to come down to the setting apart. She says, well, I don't know if we can make it or not, but thank you. Well, then the day came, and we got on the elevator, and there is Uncle Will and Aunt Nita standing there in the elevator waiting to go up. So I was very pleased that they came, that I had somebody there with me. We went in and sat down. Marion G. Romney was the apostle in charge, and there was a 70 whose name I've forgotten, but he was there assisting in the process. And it went very well, very nice. There were, I think, 6 or 8 of us in there. He set us all apart, and we started. And as we got to the door and got into the elevator, Uncle Will asked Aunt Nita, did you think he recognized you? I thought, what's she talking about? Who? And then she turned and says, I don't think he had a clue. So I learned later a little more about that. I became interested in how things were happening at that particular period of time. And so those 2 events, there were a couple of more that I could go through, but those 2 were significant in my mind and meaningful in the development of the Juanita Brooks approach to life and all the things that she did and the way she went about it. And it was a great blessing to me to be there and to just kind of tag along and be a part and see what's going on. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
For many years, Carl was a wonderful friend, dear friend. Willa worked with us in the law firm many years ago, and Walt was my football coach in high school, so but my first introduction was this book that was on my parents' shelf at home. It had been out probably a decade or more by the time I picked it up, but I just could not believe what a wonderful storyteller Juanita was. And I was, of course, pretty flabbergasted by what I read in the book. And I thought how courageous she was to have told this story. And later, as I grew a little older, I became aware that it wasn't always easy for Juanita in the community, that there were some that ostracized her because of the story that was told and wounds that were still open, and families felt badly about that. But she just seemed to stand up to that with a lot of courage. At least I felt as I observed her. I didn't know her too well personally, but I knew her to say hello when I'd see her. And I just always thought she was so courageous to tell that story. Later, when, I've read all her books, and I just really love how she tells a story. I mean, one I couldn't put down was Uncle Will Tells His Own Story. I mean, I just picked that up. I couldn't stop reading it. I just thought it was fascinating. And so I've loved the way she could not only recite accurate history, but she could make it compelling and engaging to read about it, which I think is rare with historians. And I don't think she really thought of herself as a historian, more of as from the literary background. Of course, she taught in the humanities, but her history was also extremely accurate. And as I later became church historian, I just marveled how well she got the story clear back in the late 40s and how accurately that held up. You know, the church supported a book by Rick Turley and Richard Walker and Glenn Leonard called The Massacre, and they had total access to all of the church records, including the First Presidency's records on correspondence and so forth. And I was just really pleased at how closely Juanita had told the story back when she researched in the 40s. So I think that's about all I have.
Steve, can I ask you a few questions before you pass it on?
Sure.
Did you know Juanita?
Well, I know.
Did you see her around?
I just knew her in town to say hi. I didn't know her personally. I always.
Did you know her as a very young person?
Yeah, I was young.
12 years old?
She knew I was Eric Snow's grandson. Yeah. Yeah.
What was it like to live in St. George in the 1950s and 60s?
Well, looking back, we all felt it was idyllic. It was a great place to grow up. We didn't have much, but it was just wonderful. It was great. I mean, sure there's some bad things, but I don't remember them.
I also wanted to ask, what was Juanita like? Was she monotone or dynamic? Could she keep the interest?
Well,
I ask this because I'm a much younger person, and I see these stern pictures of her, like we have on our flyer. I think of her as this tough warrior of the Lord who did this thing with all of this opposition, and I don't know if that's just what her face was like.
Well, John and I were just commenting on the photo you have there on the wall. It just looks like she's,
Same one.
yes, this piercing look. And I was young, and I always just said hello, and I didn't really engage, but she always seemed a little aloof to me, just because I had no reason particularly to engage with her. So, and I knew she was a
But she didn't
teacher.
seem piercing. Like she might seem to me in that
Oh, no, she was very kind. My grandparents thought a great deal of her, and I think I certainly have admired how composed and how she, with all the opposition that she must have personally felt, she didn't really let it show or didn't seem to bother with it. She just was above that. That was at least my impression.
I have an email here from Willa's brother, Tony, that he sent me on Monday. And he put a little story in here. And this is how his email goes. Jesse, thank you for putting this on. I want to donate $1,000 to the cause. Mom was a women's libber long before it was popular. I have a book full of stories about her. I will tell you one. I remember when we first got a television. Carl, Kay, and I were all watching a baseball game. And Mom came in and said, "Turn that thing off." We did, and she said, "Listen, listen." We said, "Mom, we don't hear anything." "Doesn't the quiet sound good?" "Turn off the outside noise and listen. You might hear something that is more important to you than that thing blaring at you." She helped all of us to listen to the still small voice she called an inspired hunch. And we're all rewarded for this advice. So, Dr. Anton L. Brooks, it says. Go ahead, Dal.
So I'm not yet as experienced as the rest of you, so I'm gonna have to use some notes. Okay, so I am Dallin Moody. I'm Tad and Willa's grandson, Juanita Brooks's great-grandson. And so I never met Juanita Brooks. I have done a bit of research about her. I know a few things about her, but I figured all of you probably know the same things and more than I know about Juanita Brooks. So I've thought what influence her life has had on my life. And I came up with 4 or 5 points that I just wanted to mention. The first thing was her example of faith. She was a faithful woman in the church, as well as in her pursuit of truth. I remember learning about her interaction when she was talking with the prophet, asking for information, and she didn't get it. And I was thinking about what kind of effect that would have on me if I was looking for the truth, honestly and sincerely, and I asked the prophet for the information he had, and he said no. It would be an interesting experience. It'd be a very interesting experience. But she remained faithful. She didn't doubt. Well, I don't know her inner struggles, but she remained faithful and continued her search and served in the church. She didn't let a personal denial shake her faith. And that's been a lesson to me. Just because I don't get an answer doesn't mean that I need to take it personally. Something else that kind of goes along the same thing is Juanita Brooks. She's super patient and persistent. In research, in school, I'm in college right now, it can be pretty frustrating when you don't have the answer. and like to a problem, and she spent years trying to find answers. And I get frustrated if I can't find it in 15 minutes. So like that's a lesson to me that truth is worth the wait. Finding the truth is worth the effort. And it also reminded me of a quote that Gordon B. Hinckley gave that my grandpa sent to me while I was on my mission. It kind of goes along with Juanita Brooks' story of searching for truth. It wasn't all exciting all the time. So this is what Gordon B. Hinckley said. He said, people who think that bliss is normal will waste a lot of time running around telling people that they have been robbed. Most putts don't drop. Most beef is tough. Most children grow up to be just people. Life is like an old-time rail train. There's dust, cinders, sidetracks, and stops, only interspersed with thrilling bursts of speed and stunning vistas. But the way to appreciate the ride is to thank God that you have it. That wasn't an exact quote. It's been a while since I've tried to say it. So, something else she taught me, which is kind of goes against what a lot of my friends think in school right now, is that you can have a successful career and a family at the same time. It is possible. You can be very successful by the world's standards in your career. At the same time, balance having kids, a church calling, and everything that goes along with it. I remember there's a story of when they went on a family vacation, or the kids thought it was a family vacation, but Grandma Brooks was actually doing some research. Yeah. And they made it work. And I think that's a lesson to me that if I have faith, I can have a family and a career, and God will make it work. And one of I'll end on this one, is the impact that she's had on my perspective of when people make mistakes in the church. I realize that there's no need to fear the mistakes a leader makes in a church, because all of us make mistakes, and ignoring those mistakes don't change the fact that they happened. So if we acknowledge them and come to an understanding of what they were and what happened, we can better learn from those mistakes and avoid them ourselves. So yeah, Juanita Brooks has affected my life, even though I never knew her. I look forward to the day that I do, but I'm grateful that she's my great grandma. So.
This is like coming home again. I used to spend more time in this house than I did in my own house. I lived on South Main Street, and Bruce Hafen and I were best buddies since kindergarten. So all of our middle school, high school, college experiences were here more than at my house, because it was nicer place for one thing. I appreciate Jessie letting me say a few things about actually 3 memories I have. I didn't know her very well, but I knew her. I was a student of hers, and so I knew her from that perspective. My first exposure to her was actually indirect. I was walking down the street between the bank and from the north part of the street of Tabernacle was, there was a bookstore there, and I just happened to stop in front of the window, and I saw this book, and it reminded me that I'd heard some people talking about her and about this book, and I just was both fascinated and had a little bit of anxiety, because I had heard people talking about her in rather negative terms, and I thought, wow, it was like she was the enemy somehow. I didn't hear anything specific, but I just remember being very anxious as I saw that book that said, "This is the Mountain Meadows Massacre," on display inside. So that was my first exposure to her directly, and I guess indirectly. The second memory had to do about 3 years later. I was a student of hers in a 9th grade English class, And all I remember about the class is that she was always teaching us how to parse sentences, how to say this is the subject, verb, object, prepositions, and so forth. And I got it. I mean, that's one of the very important things I learned in that class, and I've never learned it since, but it stuck, how she was able to teach us that. And I felt really bad. I was telling Steve this, I feel somewhat, well, maybe a lot of guilt in the way I treated her in that class. I taught 35 years at BYU, and so I know what it's like when people don't listen to what you're saying. So, but Donna Webb and I would sit on the back row, and we just sort of way back there someplace, and we just kind of fool around, goof off. And that was atypical of me. I was really a good student. I guess maybe Stan remembers. I don't know. I was a little older than you were. But I was a dutiful student. But in that class, for some reason, maybe it was because I still felt like she was a bad guy somehow. I hate to say that, but that's just kind of, and I don't know if that's really true, but I was unusual that I didn't really pay attention to her in that class. And bless her heart, I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. I attended some of the lectures because I got a pretty good grade in the class. I got a decent grade, but having taught for 35 years at BYU, I am amazed that she didn't call me on it. I would have called somebody on if I'd have treated that way. Not even once. She was always an unassuming and a kind human being. So I love her for that. And I'll go ahead and read a couple of things I wrote down this morning. Her demeanor and kindness made a deep impression on me early on in my own academic work. On a Mormon's art project, I did research one summer at the Huntington Library where she collected diaries. That was one of the first things she did to get her started about, this history stuff. In the 1930s, that led to her later books, of course. The librarians there mentioned, I remember this, her excellent work as a budding historian when they discovered that I was LDS. And I told her she was my ninth grade English teacher, and that, I think, my currency went up pretty much. Third memory. My last sight of her was a brief visit in the late 80s to the rest home she lived in during her final years. That was somewhere, I'm not sure where it was because they built so much, but I think it was somewhere between I-15 and the DSU campus. Anyway, by then she was incapacitated and responsive. I'd come too late. I feel so bad about that. To tell her how much I appreciated her example and her influence in my life. But I was prompted later, the next year, by that disappointment to visit Virginia Boyack, my fourth grade teacher, who turned me on to classical music. Her favorite composer was, forgot his name, Schubert. And so when I was learning how to play the piano, I got a simplified version of Schubert's pieces, and so that was my favorite piece. So I loved that music because of her. Well, I went back to her shortly before she died. She was still lucid. I told her what I would have told her, what would I have told Juanita? You changed my life. And she replied, you're the first of all my students who ever said I had made a difference in her life. So I've tried to go back to those people that I loved, like Ron Garner. I can still go back and talk to him, one of the great teachers of Dixie. In those wonderful Camelot years, I call them, at Dixie College. So I really appreciate this lovely lady that is still looking down at me all these years. I'm on the back row. Anyway, thank you so much for that.
Thank you, John.
I am Will and Juanita's oldest granddaughter. Paul's the oldest grandson. But, I can't even get my glasses on. But when Will and Juanita married, she had one son, Ernie. And Will had 4 sons, Walt, Bob, and my dad, Grant, and Claire. Who? Walt, Bob, Dad, and Claire. That was all.
Yeah. Ernie.
Well, I counted Ernie for her. So they started out their marriage with a ready-made family of 5 sons. And many years later, when Grandma was failing, we went to visit her too. And she didn't recognize me, but she recognized my husband, and she said, how are those 5 boys? And it just thrilled me because she was having a real struggle then. Joy, my sister, just younger than I am, said that the memory of Grandma was her cooking. She said she didn't really like to cook, but she made some things really good. She made her awesome chicken and noodles and gravy. Her gravy was really delicious. And I agree, but the thing that I loved most that Grandma made was fig jam. I loved fig jam, and I was a picky eater, but I'd go, and she'd always have it because they had fig trees.
Yeah.
And so I really loved that thing. I could have eaten a whole jar myself. My little brother, Bill, lived with the Brookses after our daddy, Grant, died. And Bill was young and had been the apple of our dad's eye, and he was the only boy. So Grandma invited him to come up and live with them on the Red Hill. And Grandpa and Grandma and Carl and Kay and Tony were wonderful for a boy who had always just had sisters. So Bill said that he enjoys Grandma, that time with her and with those boys, and he really enjoyed her personality. And he said when he took Charlene, his wife, to introduce her to him before they were married, Grandma took Charlene aside and she says, "You can do better than that." And she said it loud enough that Bill could hear. And he said that tickled him to death. And all of us who were close to Grandma knew that she'd get so involved with her work that she would sometimes forget to eat. And Susie, and sleep. Susie, my little sister that's here tonight, and her husband Frank went to visit her in Salt Lake one time. And she was really busy, but as usual, she had paperwork everywhere, but she welcomed him in and she says, "Can I get you something to drink or eat?" And she opened her fridge and there was nothing in it. And she opened her cupboards and they were bare too. They were like old Mother Hubbard. So it wasn't her priority. My close cousins that I ran around with practically all my life were Lida and Leona, Paul's sisters. And we loved to listen to Grandma's stories. She told really wonderful stories. She was a great writer, but she was a fantastic storyteller. You can just imagine. We loved that. And we could just sit spellbound listening to her. And as it was mentioned, Grandma did have a great testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And she often told us how important it was in her lives. And we know that she had gone through some real struggles with some people, but she never doubted. Our dad died unexpectedly at just age 36. And it was a week before my 13th birthday. And 2 things that were really important to me personally was Grandma said, "We're not having it on her birthday." Even though my birthday was Saturday and Bob and some of the other brothers were out of the country even, she says, "We're having it Friday." And so they didn't hold the funeral on my birthday. And then while Daddy was in the hospital just for a few hours before he passed away, it was very unexpected. Grandpa and Grandma were there the whole time supporting Mom. And she always felt that was such a blessing in her life. And not only that, but she sent Uncle Carl down to be with us kids because she didn't want us to be alone. She was really thoughtful. And after our dad died, Mom had never worked and she kind of struggled financially. But when we told Grandpa and Grandma that I was getting married, Grandma called and she said, "Don, would you like to wear Willa's wedding dress?" And what a savings to us, and what a blessing it was to us that she would think of that. And this was while she was really studying and putting together books and living in Salt Lake part-time and here part-time and running down to Huntington Library. I mean, it was really a busy time in her life, but she was so thoughtful and kind. And Grandpa and Grandma Brooks and Uncle Carl were all in our wedding reception line. And that was really important to me. I loved them. The dress fit, but I had to wear high heels because she's just a little bit taller than me. Thanksgiving at Grandpa and Grandma Humphreys. Grandpa and Grandma Brooks's were really fun. Paul probably remembers that. We had lots of cousins there, and to keep the kids busy, it was the job to go out and rake all the leaves on that front lawn, and it was big. And of course, the big boys mostly raked the leaves, and us kids would jump in them, or we would throw them in the air. And one time I remember Grandma coming out, and she scolded us and said, "You kids have got to shape up." And then she went back in the house, and I just happened to follow her in the house for some reason, and she was laughing, and she was and she was saying how much fun we were having and how cute we were. She loved us even when we were in trouble and naughty. And Grandma had a special upstairs room. And it was where she did some of her research and writing, and that little room was off limits. But once or twice, we would sneak up the stairs just to see what was so special about it. We didn't dare touch a thing because we knew she knew where everything was. But we snuck up, and we thought we were so sneaky. And she knew. Yes, wicked. Okay, my oldest two boys, Steve and Brooks, say that the thing they remember about their great-grandma Brooks was the dungeon. There was really dark stairs in that dark room downstairs in the room of the basement, and she would kind of tease them and say, "Oh, you wouldn't dare go down there. You'll get in trouble. We don't know what's down there," you know. And then she would kind of nudge him on and then say, "We sure hope you get back up here." We were so blessed to have such an intelligent, talented, colorful, caring, thoughtful, kind grandma, like our grandma, Juanita Brooks.
I didn't know that I was going to say anything. And so I've been sitting here with a lot of memories going through my head. I could remember as a little girl in bed at night, the typewriter going well into the night. She would put us to bed and do all the family things, and then she would stay up most of the night working on her typewriter. She'd get up, send us on to school, and then go to bed for a couple of hours. But that's how she accomplished and did the work that she was doing. As far as we knew, she was only mother and was always available for us. She was a very, what shall I say, free-range mother. We kind of had our, we could go and do. We went on the Red Hill and played as long as we were there to check in. The boys swam in the Cox's Pond and were shirtless all summer. And but when it came time to be home, you better be home or else you better check in so that she would know where you were. One thing about her growing up, she was the kindest, most generous person. Her family, her sisters, her nieces and nephews would come without any notification. She would put them up in bedrooms, she would feed them, and it never seemed to be a problem for her. At least she didn't let them know that it was a worrisome thing. They were always welcome to come, and she was never ashamed to serve anybody what we were eating. If she had a pot of stew on the table, on the stove, that's what we all ate. She was amazing that way, in that she just didn't care, and it didn't matter, and what we had was good enough for whoever came. And her siblings and their families, I think, abused the privilege somewhat. As I look back, we never knew who was going to be there to sleep. I don't have any memory of how she ever kept all the sheets washed. I do know that we had an old washing machine out on the backyard that was one of the, and through the ringer, and we hung them on the line, and but I never did know how she took care of all of that. She would put us to bed, and then we would hear the typewriter. She would type and work late into the night. Then she'd get up and send us off to school with a good breakfast, and then she'd go back to bed for maybe a couple of hours. But her siblings never thought about calling ahead or saying that they were coming or that they were sending children. She was welcome everybody who came. And like I say, we were kind of free-range kids. My brothers roamed the Red Hill shirtless and shoeless most of the time. And only one time when they really got in trouble was that they had been out, and then they went to a ball game, and then they didn't report home, and they went somewhere to get food. And boy, was she ever upset. They were let to know that they had to let her know where they were and what they were doing. We, as children, didn't realize that she was anything except just mother. She made us her priority, and always was there for us. And I know that she did most of her work at night, and our family vacations were all her research trips. We would go in the car, and Dad would take us somewhere to run on a lawn or somewhere while she did research in a big courthouse or in a big building. But many of our vacations were for her to do her research. As she got a little older and we left home, we realized that she was focusing more and more on her work. And it was very worrisome for us when we could see that she was starting to fail, that she didn't remember things, and that she would repeat herself. But I don't know how many of you have seen the book that came out, that all of her letters were saved. It's amazing to me. Every letter that she ever wrote, she put in a carbon. And those letters were all saved. It's almost impossible to understand and believe. And when she passed away, the Historical Society came to her home. They would not let us as the family even in until they took what they wanted. And they went through and they took she kept a carbon of every letter that she wrote, and she had boxes and boxes of things. And they took them, and they are in the Historical Society. And many of you may have seen a book that has come out recently that we gave permission for a man to go in and get her letters and to publish some of her letters in a book, and that has been done with our approval. There was only one thing in it that we had asked him to remove, and that was where she had said something to one of her friends that was a little bit too specific about the temple ceremony, and we didn't feel that was appropriate to be in there, and so the man who was publishing it took that portion out. And so, but the one thing about Mother, as I said, anybody could come any time at our home and have a meal or a bed. I felt like her family sometimes abused the privilege that they came a lot, but she was always welcoming. Whatever she had prepared to feed us was okay. She never apologized. I don't understand how come. She always felt that what we had was all right for everybody. So, like I say, I didn't know I was going to say something, so I have not prepared. But yes,
That was great.
thank you so much. I wanted to also ask you a question. Did Juanita have a motto that she lived by?
You were a member of the Brooks family. Always remember it and act accordingly.
That's right. In fact, that was written. Thank you for reminding. It was on a plaque in the window, and when you went out, she said, "You remember who you are. You're a Brooks, and you act accordingly." That's right. Thank you. That's right.
It looks like everybody's really interested to continue. We have been having a great time, and I don't know if anybody heard or noticed, but Sydney and I agreed to wear special outfits to help promote this event here today. The Historical Society has started giving tours at the Pioneer Courthouse recently, so I put a vest and an old pocket watch together, and so that's what I'm doing, and I have had my barber tailor my hair to look old-fashioned, like a bit of a pioneer. So if this looks like 1880, it's supposed to. If this looks like 1940 for today, that's what I tried to do. And Sydney here, can anybody guess what character she is dressed as today?
Well, we were sitting around our table having a historical society meeting, and Doug Alder, you know Doug Alder, he was sitting just right where this gentleman is, and he looked at me and he said, "Sydney, you look just like Juanita Brooks." Well, so I thought I'd have the courage to see if I could pull this off, so to speak, tonight, and represent her. So it's a privilege, and one of the things I remember about her is that I've been reading about is when the church denied her to have access, but meanwhile she was president of the Relief Society, and so she had an opportunity to travel all around the county and get into the records of the people. So she just worked it out that way. And so, when you want to do something bad enough, you're going to do it. So I feel like I'm a hostess here, and maybe not with the mostest, but I'm enjoying your comments and your stories, and it's very special, very special. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you, Sydney. Before we pick up with the next speakers who want to share, I just wanted to say that the first person I talked to about being a speaker here at this event a couple of months ago, he lives over here near the corner of 400 West and 100 South, and his name is Jerry Empey. Do any of you know Jerry? Oh, fantastic. This is going to be a great audience for this story. And I had mentioned 6 months earlier to him that at some point I would come back and talk to him. I've gotten to know him because I live in that neighborhood, and so I said, I'm going to talk to you later on in the year about this fundraiser we want to do. So I stopped. He was out there. I don't know if you guys know, but he grows a cotton plant right there on the side of the street in front of his yard, right by the sidewalk. And he was out there doing some weeding and raking and tending to his yard. And so I was driving by and I had a few minutes and I flipped around and stopped and I said, "Jerry, it's time to do this event. I talked to you before about this, and we're wondering if you would want to come tell stories and share about Juanita Brooks." And he stopped like he had a light bulb moment. So what I had to do was stop and tend to his topic and listen to his story in order to get to the rest of my point, which was fantastic and amazing, and I'll tell you why. He said, I loaned her a book that I never got back. She never gave me my book back. My daughter came and wanted a family heirloom, and I thought I had this book in the trunk in storage all these years, and it wasn't in there where I thought it was. And I had, right before that, I had just said, I'm the chairperson of the Statue Project Committee. That's when the light bulb went. And I said, okay. So he said, so he started acting like maybe I could help him get his book back. And I had to entertain this conversation for 5 or 10 minutes just to try to get back to my conversation. So it was such a fun experience that I just wanted to share it. And so I said, he kept on talking about it. And I said, Jerry, about what year do you think that was? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, well, she died about 30 years ago, in 1989, I think is what I have heard. So it's got to be well before that. I said, Jerry, about what year do you think that was? And he says, oh, well, I think I was a senior in high school, so about 1952 or 1953. And in my mind, my face is doing this. And I'm thinking, 68 years ago, you loaned her a book, and you want to know if I can help you get it back because I'm contacting people in your age group that are her family members, and maybe I can help you get your book back. And so it was just I said, I want to have you come tell this story. But it was my story. It was my experience. And so the book was a book of Shakespeare plays. So I decided that when I had the chance here today, I thought I would ask when all the Paul, Willa, Don, has anybody seen Jerry's book? It's a book of Shakespeare plays. He wants his book back.
Historical Society ticket.
Well, thank you for hearing my story, and I will bring the microphone over. And
Well, thank you, Jesse. My name is actually Thales Alfred Derrick. That's a mouthful. And Thales is not the easiest name to pronounce when you're looking at it on paper. And so I joined the Air Force and became a fighter pilot. And when people saw the initials TAD, I suddenly became Tad. And that's the name that's stayed with me for a long time. I grew up in Salt Lake, went to school up there. And during those years, the Mountain Meadow Massacre just wasn't talked about. I can remember in Sunday school once, we had a wonderful Sunday school teacher, and something came up about it, and she said, shh, we don't talk about that. I thought, okay. And so anyway, fast forward, I became a fighter pilot in the Air Force. The year was 1958. I was sent down to Nellis Air Force Base to get some additional training to become an instructor pilot in the F-100 fighter. And I went to MIA. And of course, you went to MIA till you were 30 in those days. And in the Las Vegas 8th Ward. And I walked into the chapel and I saw two groups. One group over here was a speaking choir and the group over here was a singing choir. I thought, okay, singing choir is out for me. And I started looking at the speaking choir. There were four young ladies kind of sitting near the back row, and one was a really attractive blonde. And thought, well, I'll go sit behind those girls. So I did and found out who they were. And there was 3 school teachers and a beautician. And they all lived together in an apartment basically downtown Las Vegas now. And anyway, Will and I became acquainted, and we started visiting and dating. We hadn't dated very long, and Willa invited her mother to come down and do a fireside. And I had no idea who Juanita Brooks was. It was Willa's mother. And so they got together, the M-Men and Gleaners, for a fireside. And I remember sitting up close to the front because Willa was sitting in the front row to introduce her mother. And so she proceeded to talk about the Mountain Meadows Massacre and other things. I was fascinated. I mean, she was a great storyteller, a great speaker, and I just sat there, probably with my mouth open because it was so interesting. And so after it was over, Willa took me up to introduce me to her as a boy. She was dating a little bit, and she said, "Thales, you've got to be related to Thales Haskell." I said, yeah, that's my great-grandfather. Well, that's what I'm named for him. Fales Hastings Haskell. I said, yeah, that's right. And she proceeded to tell me more about my great-grandfather than I had ever possibly heard before. And it was fascinating. It was wonderful. And so anyway, time progressed, and Will and I were married in March of 1959, March 7th, coming up, of 1959. But but anyway, thank you. During those years, we were gone a lot, but I did get well acquainted with Juanita Brooks. And I've been asked the question, Jesse, almost the first question you asked when we started, was there anything different about her? Was she always this piercing-eyed person who just was very strict and so forth? No. As a matter of fact, Jesse, not long in our courtship, my fiancée, or maybe still girlfriend, she said, Tad, I think you may love my mother more than you love me. She was that kind of an engaging personality. And I did love her very much as time progressed. Another thing, probably next to blonde jokes, mother-in-law jokes probably are, in the genesis of jokes, one of the top of the list. Juanita Brooks did not fit any of those joke personalities. She was warm, loving, great. I couldn't have had a better mother-in-law than Juanita Brooks. And I just wanted to tell you that.
Thank you so much.
Is that a hint?
No, it just seems like you don't really want.
Well, I just love listening to Dana. So well, I have a memory, and I don't know if, and I always thought it was my own memory that nobody else has of Grandma, because she sat me down and talked to me and told me of a story of what she experienced one time in her life. And the way she said it was like I was the only one that knew about it. Knowing Grandma, though, probably everybody has had this story told to them. But I thought it was so neat that she told me that one day she was having a need to go down to Mr. Cottom's house to work on something that they had some sort of an agreement on or disagreement on. I can't remember what she said there. And it was to the west and a little bit south of where her house was, and on the edge of the hill. And it was Cottom's lived there, and they must have moved out shortly after, because I knew Ann Cottom, which was supposed to be in that same household, and she'd moved somewhere else. So I don't know why it was at that point. Maybe Willa could tell me. I don't know. But anyway, but she said she went down to the Cottoms and to talk to Mr. Cottom, and when she got there, nobody was there. She knocked on the door, and nobody answered. But back then, we didn't lock any doors, and so she went in to see if she could find him, and he wasn't there. She decided, well, she's tired. She'd lay down for a minute until he got back. And she felt all of a sudden quite tired. So she laid down, and the next thing she knew, she said she was floating above her body. And she then, at that point, found herself in her old home in Bunkerville. And she was noticing that her dad and mom were in this one little room, and all the doors were shut, and there's a fire going on in either the fireplace or the stove. I can't remember which, but anyway, they were having supper, and of course that would be bread and milk. And Dad had just got in from milking the cow, and he was complaining to Mom how that cow really had some problems, and they had to have some words to get things straightened out. And he told her what he had said to the cow, and Grandma said it was quite colorful, but she didn't quote exactly what Dad had said to the cow. But anyway, she suddenly felt like she was all of a sudden going back to her body. And she saw somebody coming up the hill, so she re-entered her body. And when he come in, she sat back up and talked to him. And she said later, in a few days, not very many, that she got a chance to talk to Dad. Said, "Dad, what's the matter with that old cow? And I heard you called her a few names and described her and told him what he had said to her and described the setting and everything." And her dad, of course, was really startled. She knew everything that was going on there. And I thought, what a neat experience she had. She was not just a historian or not just taking care of a family we all heard about and put up with grandkids too, besides all the other kids. But she was also very spiritual. She was in tune. And I thought that was a very interesting story to relate tonight. There's a lot I could tell, but one time it reminded me when they was talking here about the kids running around shirtless. I was kind of adopted almost into the family because I was just 2 years younger than Tony, and Tony was just younger than Kay, and Kay was just younger than Carl, and so I was kind of the end of the family in a way. And so we were always together. And we went up, we'd take off in the morning and go on the Red Hill and come back when the sun sets. So run around having a great time. And one time we were up there, and of course, being shirtless, Tony was a little more fair-skinned than I was. When we got back, he was bright red. And Grandma came out and saw that. And she grabbed a hold of Carl, because Carl was supposed to be in charge of us little ones. And she really let him have it. And he suffered for that for a few days. Me, I was kind of brown. I'd been running around a long time anyway, but I didn't get any trouble at all and no pain. But I know I got sent home sometimes at night, and I didn't get a ride home. So I was kind of mischievous at times. So, Grandma was really a wonderful grandma, and I thought, seeing what she had told me later, that what a spiritual woman she was, and is.
My name is Phil Tuckett, and I am a professor of digital film at Dixie State University. I was here in 1964, and I was a football player. There was 240 students at Dixie, and 100 of us were football players, which showed you the priorities were in order, right? And so we football players are, of course, I was like all of them, trying to get out of work academically just so we could go play ball. And one day somebody said, "Oh, you should take an English class from this lady that's walking right over here." And it was just this little old lady, like all kinds of little old ladies I've seen in my life. And I wasn't interested. So then I did my tour of duty through Dixie and Reber, and then I played for the San Diego Chargers, and then I got a job working at NFL Films in Philadelphia. And I was at a flea market in Philadelphia, downtown Philadelphia, and I saw this book, and it said, Sagebrush and Cactus, Juanita Brooks. And it was just like an alarm bell that went off in my head. Really? I wonder if it's the same person that was pointed out to me on campus. And I bought the book for 25 cents, I remember clearly. And I took it home and I read it cover to cover in one day. And then I got every book she ever wrote and everything that was written about her. And for the whole 38 years I was in Philadelphia, I was studying about this woman. And I made it a goal in my life to make a movie about her life, because everything you're saying is great and as it applies to here, but she was beyond that. She transcended all of that. She went back to Columbia all by herself, and she could have been the hit of New York if she would have chosen to do that. And so I've always wanted to make a movie to show the greatness of this woman, not in the context of Washington County, but in the context of the world. And that's still a hope of mine. We have a screenplay written, and it's called Riding the Edge, the Juanita Brooks story, based on something her dad told her one time about stop going head on into the competition, but right on the edge so you can shape people's ideas. And so I'm 73, and I figure I got another 10, 12, 14 years making movies, and I will make Riding the Edge. I swear, because that moment that I saw that book there, it became predestined in my mind that had to be at least the culmination of my career as a filmmaker.
Thank you, Phil. I've been reading her books specifically for 2 months, and I think I'm just at the beginning stage of what you just described, because all I want to do is get all of her books and read them all.
I just have a couple of things that I wanted to say about Grandma. She was really a wonderful lady. Oh, she was just really a wonderful lady that I thought she knew everything. And so I met Carl, and it was just across the street where I was living from where Carl lived. And so anyway, I met him and we got married. And, you know, out of all of my lives with her, I have to say one thing, even though we had our ups and downs a little bit right at first. Anyway, she was the only person that I have ever seen with as much integrity that she had. She never talked about anything, and she never lied. And this is the way it was. And I always appreciated her for that, for her integrity and her love.
Thank you, Carla.
One more thing answering your question about did she have a motto? Do you remember that question?
Yes.
One of the things she lived by, I remember her saying, only the truth is good enough for the church to which I belong.
I just wanted to tell you that she was not very secure in her looks. She felt like she was not attractive, and she didn't worry about buying things. My dad bought almost all of her clothes, and he would bring them home from Snow's Dress Shop, if you remember Snow's Dress Shop, and she would try them on, and if she liked them, then we'd keep them. If not, then he'd take them back. But she didn't care a bit about looking glamorous or beautiful or wonderful. It was just too much bother. So,
Like eating.
but she did have beautiful brown natural curly hair, and so her hair always looked nice, but she never wore any makeup. And my dad he'd go to Snow's Dress Shop. He'd bring home 3 or 4 dresses for her to try on. If she liked them, then he'd go down and pay for them. If she didn't, he'd take them back. But that's an interesting thing that people didn't know about her.
I want to tell you what Grandma said about her looks. I'm sure they've all heard this, but Grandma said about her looks that she was uglier than a mud fence daubed with pollywogs.
Tell them about how she took care of her sisters and getting them all to an education.
The what?
Your sisters all got education because she paid for it.
Oh yeah, she did.
And they all had dresses to graduate.
Well, you probably know that she supported her brothers and her sisters. She made sure that they all went to college, and she helped pay for it. And when they needed a new graduation dress, then she would buy it. And when her younger sisters were graduating from high school in Virgin Valley, you know, they don't have any flowers down there. And so she gathered up baskets of flowers and took them down to decorate the stage. And her younger sister was graduating. She hadn't had a new dress for I don't know how many years, and Mother bought a new dress and took it down for her. And she was almost embarrassed because she was the only one who had a new dress.
Thank you again, Willa. Clark, did you want to say a few things?
She was a favorite among all the nieces and nephews. We all lived, not everybody lived in St. George. We lived in Mesquite. And all of our cousins consider her the favorite. Uncle Will was the postmaster, and so occasionally we'd catch a ride on the mail truck coming from Mesquite up to St. George. That's right, 50 cents, and you could ride in the back. And it always stopped at the Indian reservation, so sometimes we had company with us. But Aunt Nita was a remarkable woman. She lived a few years later in life in the Sugar House area in Salt Lake, and Ken and I were in the insurance business in Salt Lake, and occasionally would stop by and visit with her. And she would ask her questions, and she would tell us some remarkable stories about what happened. Early, I think she was the Relief Society president, stake Relief Society president in St. George during the Depression years. And you remember the CCCs that Roosevelt put into effect, and there was some money made available to collect journals and diaries of the people in southern Utah. And so she got women in the Stake Relief Society to go around and help gather these up. And that's where many of these journals and diaries came from. And she took meticulous care of them. That then had these ladies type them up and make copies, and then she'd make sure they got back, the originals got back to the owners. And then she began to hear a little bit about Mountain Meadows in some of those journals. The thing that impressed me the most as we talked to her, this little girl from Bunkerville, she talked about going up on the hill and looking down over the valley, and the fields would look small in the pattern. And to think what she did then, it was mentioned once she went to Cornell. That's a long ways away for a little girl from Bunkerville to go. She talked about she was so homesick. I think she'd left Ernie with Grandma and Grandpa, her mother and father, lived in Bunkerville. And she's telling one day that as she was walking across campus, the chimes on the college bell began to, she called it play Vespers. And the song was Lead Kindly Light. And anyway, she cried. She did say often, even when with some of the general authorities, Delbert Leon Stapley once called her in to talk and encouraged her not to do it. And she said, only the truth is good enough for my church, the one I belong to. She had a little office in that old home back off the kitchen, and it was dark back there. And that's where her typewriter was that I remember, Willa. Is that where it was with you too? That little room She had her ironing back there. And then when you moved down. And she told us that she always had a couple of basketfuls of ironing to do there. So when people came, she could take the bag of ironing up and set it on her work so that people couldn't see what she'd been doing, because she had to be very careful. Yeah.
And when somebody had come, she'd take the thing off and pretend she was ironing.
And I remember her telling us that she never mentioned Uncle Will about the book at all because if she were going to be excommunicated, she didn't want him to have to be. And there's a couple other things that I thought of that now escape me, but she really was a favorite among all the nieces and nephews, and Uncle Will too. When we'd go down in the dungeon, he'd occasionally come down and tell us Indian stories. He'd even speak a little Indian to us. We supposed it was real Indian anyway. But anyway, did you want to?
I'll be brief. Tragically, I didn't know. Pardon? Okay. I'm Dana Moody. I am Juanita's granddaughter. But tragically, I didn't know Juanita when she still was cognizant. She started to have dementia and Alzheimer's. And so some of my memories of her are quirkier memories. Although I do remember as a young girl going to her home in Salt Lake City and full of books. And always she was studying and researching while we would visit. However, I just wanted to say such a plug for history, that it's through her history and through her books that I know my grandmother. And that just like my son, I am inspired by her example and I am influenced by her work, and that impacts me on a very, very personal level. I remember my mom saying once that Grandma said that a woman's life doesn't start until she's 40. And at the time I remember thinking, 40? Whoa. And when I decided to go back to graduate school, which I'm in graduate school right now, I thought to myself, a woman's life doesn't start until she's 40. I'm well into my life. And so I think that she continues to be an inspiration to her posterity, even though they may not have known her personally. And she is that for me. The inspiration of her devotion to her faith, her family, and to the truth is absolutely inspiring.
Thank you, Dana. You know, before we finish up, I wanted to ask if there was anybody else that wanted to share anything.
Let me just follow up on what Dana said. I just think none of us will ever be able to record our own story as well as she did. But I think it's a powerful example how we all should record our stories because they're important, every one of our stories. And if we don't tell it, somebody else is going to do it for us. So,
yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. In my experience, reading the books and what I've known about this whole story, it begins when, as a young child, after moving here to the St. George area in 1986, I was 7 years old. And shortly after that, we went on a ward father and son outing. And I think I was told several times the name of the location that this was going to happen at was Mountain Meadows. And okay, it's the first time I've heard of it. Sounds pretty cool. Mountain Meadows, meadows in the mountains. Great. I could just picture it. And we went, and it was kind of late in the evening. It was a part of the year where it got dark early. And we camped at Mountain Meadows, at the commemorative site, Mountain Meadows, right across the creek from the gravesite. And because it was dark so soon after getting there and setting up camp, I didn't see the big pile of rocks. Went about the night, had a great time, probably roasting marshmallows and hunting snipes and eating hot dogs and the things that we did. The next morning, and because it was dark, I was kind of disappointed that I couldn't go down and play in that creek that you have to walk across to get over to the site. And I was really planning on playing around in that creek in the daylight first thing in the morning when I could see. It just looked so neat. It looked like an amazing creek. And so that's what I was doing with the other boys. And this is before the current parking lot and the walkways were there that are modern. This is probably 1987. And so I was playing down that slope, the dirt, the mud, the water, the cool, crisp temperature. And after about an hour, and realized these other boys are coming up and down this trail up the slope. Well, what's over there? Why is this trail here? This is a very well-made trail. What's over there? Oh, it's the site. It's the grave site. What do you mean the grave site? I didn't catch the other part of it yet. So that was my perspective, was I thought I had already been informed about the place we were going to and what it was like. And only got part of the story. And so I went up to go look at it, and I sort of ended up being totally by myself to go explore this gravesite. And there were weeds growing out of the rocks. It was before the current modern, nicely decorated amenities are there around it. And it was like the stories you hear of what it was like over the generations back then after it was first put together. Because it was so much like the wilderness. And so the other kids were trying to explain to me what it was, that knew what it was. And I said, what do you mean there's a bunch of people buried under there? How could that be? So that was my first experience with this. And came and found my dad, and we went driving home and asking what about this situation, and he just proceeded to say, well, son, sometimes bad things happen, and here's how we deal with it. And it's the same kind of comments that I hear Doug Alder saying and explaining, that there's sometimes bad things happen and there's a good way to deal with it, and bringing it out into the light. Where the darkness cannot live and cannot thrive, is really so helpful. And it's the whole point of why Juanita did that. And so I have come to tears reading the stories from Quicksand and Cactus in the past few weeks, just the few initial stories in the first chapters. This has been a very powerful and meaningful experience for me. And I feel like I have now realized that I'm a student of hers after this meeting today. I feel like a family member, and when we were sitting there, I realized I had something else fun that I might share that I planned today. And so I don't know if you guys can see this, but I have a new pair of socks, and I just wondered if anybody knows the story about the Brooks person who slept on the steps of Dixie Academy in 1913 so he could get the first spot in line and register. Was that a relative? Was that his last name, Brooks? Sam Brooks.
That was our dad's youngest brother.
Okay. So I just wondered if I could quickly have all of the family members of Juanita Brooks' relatives raise your hand and just give us a number of who are relatives. In-laws included. Sure. So anyway, these socks have buffaloes on them. And I just realized that when I got these recently, I should wear these because Brooks the Bison is the mascot of Dixie State University, the Trailblazers, after they changed the mascot from the Rebels to the Trailblazers. And so I have Brooks the Bison on my socks to help commemorate the event tonight, and I thought that would be a...
Uncle Sam was determined that he would be the first student registered. He had worked with our grandpa to build the arch. You look at the beautiful stonework that's been done there, and that decorative work, that was all done by our grandfather. And he had hauled rocks and worked on that. So he was determined he was going to be the first one to register. And so he slept all night right by the door, so nobody else could get in.
Well, I've been truly blessed to be able to be a part of this, and so I have some things I want to share and give a thanks to everybody as we close up for the night. It's been really great to gather together with you at this evening to commemorate Juanita Brooks and the work she has done to better our community and our culture. To honor her in a visible way, we have commissioned a life-size bronze statue from local artist Annette Everett. We have been fundraising for over 2 years toward our goal of $65,000. Thus far, we have received in hand $33,000. We have additional pledges from potential large donors who have asked us to demonstrate broad family and community support. Many people who want to support this project may be able to give $25 to $100. Donations of any amount are welcome. In fact, many small donations demonstrate that there is a broad support for this important project. Those who are unable to make large financial donations can honor Juanita's legacy by telling others about the fundraising opportunity and by showing up at events to honor her. Yes, we need to meet our fundraising goal, but the true purpose of the project is to bless our community going forward. If 100 or more people came to the statue installation ceremony, they will have the memory to pass down through their families for generations. The message of Juanita's life and legacy is that we can overcome hardships and shortfalls. The children and people of today will be greatly blessed in coming generations by the example of Juanita Brooks. I would like to introduce Debbie. Raise your hand, Debbie.
If I stand up, I'm not any taller.
Debbie, who will be ready to take your donations here tonight. We have several different methods of taking them. We will provide time for you to do so in a few minutes while you enjoy some dessert and other refreshments. We have a clipboard where you can provide the name, phone number, and email of any people who you want to refer to us. We also have a website where you can direct people who you want to refer us to. Thank you again for coming and for all the support and contributions that you have given and may give. Please get some cookies and have seconds on any other refreshments while you mingle and enjoy the rest of your evening together here tonight. And remember, we want to get your contact information so we can continue to keep you informed about this project with updates to other activities, and especially to invite you to the statue installation ceremony when the time comes.
We also will have a GoFundMe page this weekend that we'll start on our website. So if you're on Facebook or social media and you know GoFundMe, we as Washington County Historical Society are sponsoring one that's a charity one. So all of the funding comes to us and they don't charge us all the fees and everything. So that's a really fun way to share it. If you want people to give to it, you can ask for them to give on your birthday instead of a birthday present. They can do that, and so this will be something that can kind of go a little bit viral and not quite as clunky as it has been in the past, and hopefully will really smooth. That should be over the next couple of days, so we'll have a GoFundMe with her beautiful picture up there.
Right.
So,
Are there going to be one or two?
Well, we've decided to only talk about one here at this event, specifically because the other one, if the first one happens, I feel secure we can say the second one will happen. But the fundraising shouldn't be linked together and thought of as we're fundraising for two. We're just fundraising for one, and there's...
The first statue going to go at the old Dixie College building or at the new university?
Yes, the city has said before that they would... Yeah.
I'm the past president. And my name is Richard Kohler, and I'm an architect. And I have talked at the beginning of this project. I talked to John Pike, who was mayor then, and Doug Alders suggested a location. When you look directly at the entry to Dixie Academy, to the left there's a 1917 statue, memorial of some sort. To the right, we suggested about the same space between there and the splash pad would be a good place to put Juanita. The mayor and prior council members have said that seems like a reasonable thing. we need to go on an official city meeting agenda and have that approval. And we're going to do that in the very near future. But the city has agreed in principle to accept the statue, to do the erection and the base out of city funds, and to keep it, maintain it, to have the maintenance obligation for it, and accept it from us as basically a donation. So and I think we're actually getting where for the first one, we probably need commitments from people that's not committed. If everybody comes with the commitments, we're trying to raise between, say, maybe $6,000, $7,000 and $10,000 yet to get to that $65,000 threshold. The second statue, there's a fairly wealthy gentleman associated with Dixie State, and he'll probably just fund that one because she taught in both places. She taught at both the old, where she was a student more really at the old one. At the newer campus, she was a professor and founder of does Doug always say the archives?
Yes.
The library
She
to some
started
extent.
The DSU
and
archive in a maintenance closet.
she just done a lot of things. We talk about her more in her books, but she did a lot of things and had a lot of accomplishments outside of the books themselves. The State Historical Society work, which you talked about a little bit today, certainly educational. Yes. Yeah.
Jesse, are these donations tax exempt?
They are.
Yes.
The ones that come through Washington County Historical Society are tax. Yeah, it'll say on the GoFundMe it is tax exempt.
Yeah.
We're a 501c3 nonprofit.
Yeah. We have a PayPal an account that it can be easily accessed through our website. If you use that method, we take checks made out to the Washington County Historical Society.
I have a little square if somebody wants to take a credit card
That
there.
is a modern app and digital device that you plug into your phone and you can swipe a credit card through. You plug it into the headphone jack and you can swipe a credit card through it. I think that's how that works. So
We don't have Venmo yet.
thank you again, everybody, for coming. It's been so great to be with you here tonight, and have a great night. Remember, please get some cookies and help yourself to other refreshments. And Debbie is ready to take any donations that will be given here tonight.